I think it's pretty fair to say that personal experiences impact on whether a person participates regularly in physical activity. So I want to focus on these personal experiences and how they may differ from individual to individual. But before we do that, I kind of, by way of a reminder, or it might be the first time you've seen this, I just want to remind you that what we consider to be active for children would be 7 lots of 60 minutes of activity per week. Okay, so we're looking at the factors which might encourage this to happen more often. So just be clear, this is for, if I write it correctly, this is for children. Okay, this is what's considered to be an active child. Okay, and if we were to look at adults would be, our recommendations would be something along the lines of, well, specifically 5 times 13 minutes per week. And the question I want to sort of pose here is, well, look, what personal experiences might cause the tendency for someone to be active in this way to be greater or lesser, okay? So let's have a think about it. What are these factors? I don't know why I said it like that. What are these factors? So let's get started. One of the most pivotal ones is family, and this will come as no surprise to you. Whether someone's active or not is directly, or participates in regular physical activity, is directly impacted by the members of the family. So the questions we'd ask is, does the individual receive support? Okay, that could be in the forms of all kinds of things like encouragement. What are the socialization processes? Socialization, we mean the learning of norms. Okay, what about socialization? What are the norms within the family? What about practical things? What about money? Can subs and fees and things be paid for? What about transport to clubs, to fixtures, to events? This is some kind of thing. Put question marks in there. So those factors will have an impact on whether someone's active or not. Now look, this is not to simply say that well-resourced families with strong support mechanisms will be the only places where people are physically active. Of course not. People choose at an individual level, but there's certain things that make it more likely, and that's what we're looking at here. Let's look at another one, gender. Okay, this is an interesting point, whether one is male or female. Okay, so we've got gender here. So question we're going to ask is, what are the stereotypes? So, for example, are there stereotypes that are discouraging or limiting for, let's say, males in dance? Do those stereotypes reverse in situations such as females in rugby? What are the things that might be barriers and preventions, or things that encourage performers to participate? This is an interesting concept for you. What about the glass ceiling? Okay, I'm going to put that in inverted commas. Glass ceiling in sort of air quotes. Glass ceiling. The glass ceiling is an imaginary barrier above one's head that's not actually there. Okay, or if it's, and the idea of this is that people will only kind of follow pre-trodden paths, and they need someone to create the model before they themselves will follow it. So are there role models, for example, to allow people to break the glass ceiling? And we've also in here got the notion of access. What about the availability of, for girls in rugby, are there the availabilities of clubs, of competitions, of coaching sessions and so on? And if they're not, of course, that's a limitation. My second example of green here, I want to talk about society as a whole. Society impacts on people whether they participate regularly or not. And it does this in the following ways. Society develops norms. We've just looked at a couple of them with regard to gender, for example. And it develops expectations of people. And those expectations can be super practical. Okay, we mentioned before about physical activity being daily by adults. 5 times a week for adults, for example. But the expectations of society are that adults work 40-odd hours a week, and that they bring up their families, and they balance their checkbook, and they clean their house, and they do all these things. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying that can have an impact, okay, on one's choice or options to participate. We've mentioned family already. We can certainly mention peers, and I think this is a really important one, particularly for teenagers, okay? What is the culture that a young person, say, is growing up in with regard to physical activity amongst their friendship group? Are they experiencing encouragement? And now you've probably got loads of examples around you. You're probably more in the know than I am. But this is going to be different for different people, okay? So I want you just to sort of reflect on that, and reflect on whether different people get different levels of encouragement from peer groups around them. We've mentioned money already with regard to family, but what about cost? Okay, some activities are really exclusive. So the notion of exclusiveness is a really important one when it comes to sort of socioeconomic status. So something like a golf club membership, something like a health club membership, something like experiencing yachting is not available to all people, or fewer people than other examples of activities. I want to mention the word access again. I've mentioned it already, but I want to mention access again. I think it's an important one to dwell on. Access might involve the availability of clubs in your environment, might be the availability of competitions in your environment. I mean, if you're living in London, for example, or Birmingham or Manchester or Liverpool, or in any kind of urban environment, do you have access to, for example, facilities, clubs, opportunities to do skiing, for example? And you might say to me, well, there's a dry slope or whatever, but okay, that's quite a limited resource and one that might not make a lot of difference to a lot of people. And finally, guys, and I think I mentioned this word earlier on to you, but it's the notion of role models. Okay, I think I talked about it in relation to the glass ceiling. Role models are really important to people. One way in which human beings develop behavior is copying others. Parents are particularly important role models, and I'm going to mention this word of socialization. Again, this idea of learning society's norms through modelling it on others' norms and expectations. Now, take, for example, a young person. If both their parents are highly physically active, it stands to reason that it's more likely that the child might be themselves someone to choose to be physically active. Now, last couple of points from me. There is no question whatsoever that within this discussion, school plays a really important role. And I'm someone who's very proud to have been, and considers myself still, to be a PE teacher. So the PE program at school, and think about across the whole of schooling, from infancy to juniors up to secondary and so on, that's really important. Now, reflect yourself on the quality that you've experienced. I'm sure it's been magnificent, but could it have been better in certain areas? What was it like in secondary compared to primary, for example? I'm only asking it in the most generic sense. It will vary from person to person. And has that inspired you to participate? We could also, of course, it's not surprising that schools develop, and you guys, I'm sure, if you're doing this course, may well have taken part in this, but extracurricular activities, teams, clubs, competitions, fixtures, county cups and so on, whatever it happens to be, they are significant in a young person's choice of activity. And what about the wider curriculum that a school will adopt? And how about the encouragement of things such as a health curriculum? Which of course can lead to great participation. What about the influence of what I'm going to refer to here as PSHE, which seems to change its name every time I make a video? But what about things, even something simple like sports day? Okay, these things can have an impact on an individual's choices to participate. Now, I'm going to mention one other thing to you here. I'm going to kind of like sketch it off like here, because I'm going to do a whole other lesson on this. Don't neglect the notion of physical literacy. Now, I'm not going to get into this here because we are going to do a separate lesson on it, this physical literacy. But what I would sort of mention to you is that this is often the school's aim. So the school's aim is to develop physical literacy in young people, okay? Or let's put it in inverted commas, physical literacy. And again, I'm not going to get into it here, but it's something that relates to movement, which is not surprising. It's physical, okay? But it all movement is what I meant to write there. It relates to movement. Physical literacy also relates to health. Okay. Physical literacy also relates to choice. Okay, so young people, as they age, choosing to participate. And finally, guys, it relates to lifelong activity. Now, I'm not going to get into the details here, but that perhaps summarizes what we want people to develop as youngsters in order for their choices around participation to be better. But what we've got here are some of the factors, and can, in a negative sense, even become some of the barriers, okay, to that actually happening.